Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm so happy to have Rachel Weaver with us, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. Her novel Point of Direction was named a top 10 book to pick up now by Oprah Magazine and won the Willa Cather Award for Fiction. Rachel's newest book, Dizzy, an arresting new memoir, according to Maureen Corrigan on NPR's Fresh Air, published in February of 2026. Her second novel, The Last Run, is forthcoming in June 2026 with Lake Union Publishing. Prior to earning her MFA in Writing and Poetics at Naropa University, Rachel worked for the Forest Service in Alaska, studying bears, raptors, and songbirds. She teaches at Wilkes University and Lighthouse Writers Workshop and holds a CPA in narrative medicine from Columbia University. For more information, you can visit rachelweaver.net, and I'll have that in the show notes. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm so happy that you're here to talk about Dizzy with us. Can you just, in a few words, talk about what your book is about?
Yeah, it's a memoir. It's a braided narrative of my time working in the backcountry of Alaska around bears and other animals. And then my time as a chronically ill patient with a mysterious illness for a decade. And then another 8 years of trying to find some relief from the symptoms once I was given a diagnosis.
And so it's almost like a medical mystery, right? Because we're going through it with you. And it's more than 8 years, right? You go up to like 16 years, is it?
Yeah, so it was 10 years before anyone could figure out what was wrong with me. And then from there, it was another 8 years. So 18 in total before I really found any sort of lasting relief.
Yeah. And so when you were writing it, you were in the throes of being dizzy. I mean, how is that to write a memoir that's powerful and it's something that you're in the middle of while you're writing it?
Yeah, it was really hard. I mean, a big part of the dizziness for me was that screens bothered me and I had really terrible brain fog. So it was hard to manage both of those things. But I found a lot of adaptations and workarounds, in the midst of being so sick in the middle of my life. It started when I was 31. And for a long time, I had the feeling that I guess that's it. I can't do all these things anymore. And then I got to a point where it really was not resolving and I still wanted to do things like write books. And so I started trying to figure out ways that I could still do those things, but it was 100% different than how everyone else was doing those things.
And you were later, I know you worked in Alaska, but later what you worked in an office.
I did, yes. So I was working for the Forest Service as a field tech on biology projects in Alaska. And then when I left Alaska to go to graduate school, I just needed any job, and I found a job in a lab. It was great because, well, first of all, health insurance came with the job eventually, and I could work a second shift. So the idea was that I could go to school in the day and then work 4 to midnight in this lab, this aerospace lab, and finish school quickly and get back to Alaska. But of course, that is not exactly what happened.
Now, the way that you start your prologue is you crash through the ice. And what made you decide to start there? Because that wasn't the beginning of the dizziness. So, because I was trying to connect it later, because then you bring it up later also. And I'm like, oh, good. I'm glad she brought it up. And it started the next section of the book in a way for me.
Yeah, it's a very short. I mean, prologues are always kind of a tricky thing, right? Typically, they happen outside of the time frame of the book, which this one does. And, they need to be pretty short and punchy to work, I think. And this one I struggled with a lot. It was in there and then it was gone, and then it was in there and then I took it back out and then it was in. I ended up leaving it in because I feel like it's such a good metaphor for the whole thing, right? I was skating on the slough in Alaska, which is a river that connects to the ocean. So it's not a great idea to skate on them because they're not complete. They're subject to tides. So anyway, I was skating at night and it was beautiful. And then I fell through the ice. And that's pretty much what happened to me with my health. I was healthy, I was fine. And then I woke up one morning debilitatingly dizzy, and it didn't stop. It was 24/7 for 18 years. So it just was such a good metaphor that I decided to leave it in there. But that's definitely a question people ask here and there.
Yeah, and speaking of metaphors, you have quite a few. I mean, there are some actual situations as well. For example, the bear and the deer and the land of the wellness, the land of the sickness reference. I don't know if that's exactly a metaphor, but you're categorizing something. How did you decide, and was that part of the process of writing the book? Like you thought of metaphors as you were writing, or it was just part of what you were doing?
I think when we are writing, if we can put our minds as deeply into the experience of the time we're writing about, then we start to recognize our points of reference at that point in time, right? So I had been living in Alaska in a off the grid cabin, no electricity, no running water. You had to boat or hike to it. I had been spending all of my time in very remote areas, dropped off by float plane or helicopter or boat for days at a time, sometimes just a single day. And so all of my points of reference were the natural world and animals, and those were my points of reference. So in those early years, especially of the dizziness, those were still my points of reference. And it added some to my dislocation of being here and being in the medical world. So I think that those metaphors just naturally occur in a writer's mind when you can fully immerse yourself back into that period of time that you're writing from. So if I was writing about this time in my life, those points of reference might be a little different because now I live a more normal person's life in a small town and that sort of thing.
Interesting. A lot can work as a metaphor for your situation. Even the idea of dizzy, the untetheredness, which you use throughout. Was that a way that you thought of using the title in certain manifestations in the book?
I'm really bad at titles. And so all of my books, I just call the first one was the Lighthouse book. And then this one was the Dizzy book. And then the third one, the one that's coming out this summer, was the Fishing book. And then obviously I have to come up with other titles. And usually that tends to happen at the editor stage. And so I thought that this one would have a different title, but everybody seemed to be in agreement that Dizzy was a strong enough or good enough title. I didn't think through that one as much as the others because everybody was sort of like, this works.
Sure, and it's an active verb, so active verbs are very effective as titles. Your writing feels intimate, but it doesn't over-explain. How did you learn to trust the reader? Was that through the process of writing other books before this one?
I'm very self-taught, or originally I was very self-taught. I love to read, and I always liked voices like that. Like that was the type of writing that I was drawn to as a reader before I ever started trying to write my own books. And then when I first started writing, I didn't write like that at all because it was not, I couldn't do it. It took a long, long time to distill my own voice on the page into that type of voice that I really like to read. And I was really frustrated at first because I thought it should be much easier than that. Like I felt like I should be able to replicate it pretty quickly and easily, but it took lots and lots of years of just distilling and distilling and distilling to get to what I knew from the beginning I wanted to do.
Interesting. And so you also, not just the metaphors, but the structuring, right? So you have the braiding and then you have the years separating. How did you decide to do that? Was it to break up the manuscript? Did it propel you forward in some way?
So I originally wrote just the illness narrative, and it was too hard to read. It was too hard to read. I didn't know I was writing a book at first. I just knew that I needed to write it all out to help myself process. So that was the first draft, right? And then I was like, well, if I'm going to make this into something that other people would want to read, it's going to need something else. And so I had had this experience early on coming straight from Alaska where I saw more bears than I did people in a day, in any given day in of working. And there are very specific things that happen when you run into a bear in the natural world. You don't try to be the dominant one. You take that submissive role and you let the bear be dominant, and that keeps everybody safe, right? It keeps you safe, it keeps them safe, in an interaction that might leave them harmed or cause them to use up a bunch of their calories, which they are trying to save for the winter. And I was in all of these interactions with clinicians, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is the same thing. There are these specific roles that we're expected to play, right? Based on the clinic itself, the setup, the way the doctor is often standing and you're sitting, you're cold and you're in your little paper gown, all the things. You're in his space or her space. He or she, the clinician, tends to like run the show, right? They're the ones that interrupt when you're talking. They're the ones that direct the conversation. They often turn their back to you, which is a dominant behavior in bears. They decide when it's over, right? They're up and out, gone. And so I was really dumbfounded by that for a long time. And I kept trying to figure out, like, how does this work? How would it be better? Because it wasn't really working if I was taking that submissive role. But the longer it went on, the longer I was, no, I've already tried that, or no, it's not that. I don't think it's this, whatever. So I sort of ended up in this slightly more dominant role, and that often didn't go well. And so then I just started thinking about the power dynamics and how to navigate that best so that the interaction with the clinician would go as well as I needed it to. So then when I started thinking about this as a book, I thought, well, there's all these, Alaskan adventure stories I could tell, but it didn't seem to weave. Like I was like, how does that braid have anything to do with the narrative of me being ill? And then I started looking at through the lens of power dynamics, and then I was like, oh, that's it. That's the mirror, right, between those two threads. So then I just started picking different stories from my time in Alaska that somehow mirrored that power dynamic, or when it went wrong or when it worked out or whatever, however I could. So then it was a long process of putting in story, like remembering stories, like, oh yeah, there was that time this thing happened. And then I would write it, and then I'd have to try to figure out, does it fit? Does it not fit? So it was a long, long process of trying to get that braid to work.
And then also adding in about Mike, your romantic life, and being a mother, you put that in. But a lot of it was going against the grain of what society or people were telling you, right?
Yeah.
Especially for pregnancy, because of your medical condition. You did kind of fight the system, even though the system was consuming you at one point. So there's that struggle also that is paired with the power dynamics. I think that's a great way of saying that. But it's more than one strand woven in as well. Can you talk about what else you wove in?
Yeah, it is. And, a lot of it still comes down to that power dynamic. I think when you're chronically ill and your body is doing whatever it's going to do, you have no control over it, over this thing that has been very useful and worked really well for 30 years. It does feel like a big loss of power. And so I think a lot of the other parts that I added in were places where that journey of who's in charge, right? Am I in charge? My brain? Am I like me, myself? Am I in charge? Or is this illness in charge? Or is this doctor in charge of like what I can and can't do? And how often can I subvert what I'm being told is something that I will be able to manage or not be able to manage so that I can manage it. And then how much does that cost me? Everything costs you something when you're dealing with a chronic illness because you only have so much energy, you only have so much brain space or screen time or whatever it is. So I think in my mind, all those different braids started to circle around who holds the power when, what entity or what person holds the power and when.
And what about the years? Because even as the years went on, the chapters got smaller. You did it on purpose because there was progress being made. How did you decide that?
I think anytime you write an illness narrative, the worry is that, or the danger is that it becomes too repetitive, right? Like I saw whatever, 40, 50 doctors. I don't even know how many. And if every time I count, I remember some other various people that I saw along the way. So I don't actually know what the accurate count is. The worry, as far as a reader or reader standpoint, is that it would just get repetitive and like enough's enough, right? Because that is how I felt the whole time. So I needed it to move faster in those later years so that it felt compelling to keep going, right? So I used all the tricks of a fiction writer except for the make stuff up trick. So I made shorter sections, I made like quicker action. I made it feel like you were moving through the years quickly by separating it out by year so that, you look at year 15, as the reader, you're like, oh my gosh, year 15. But then you get a quick, sort of punchy scene. And then, oh, year 16, whoa, year 17, right? So it was done very intentionally to keep the reader's attention and not make it feel as bogged down as it like actually was.
So did you struggle with the ending? Because when you have a chronic illness, it's an ongoing life thing, right? Even though you're at the other end of the journey, well, the beginning part of the journey.
So the book sold before I found the research, the clinic that was researching this new way to look at migraine. So the book sold with a very different ending than the current ending, which is that I've been feeling really good for the last 2.5 years and free of the dizziness for the most part. So we had a conversation about it, my editor and my agent, because originally it wasn't a restitution narrative. It's a book about me learning how to live with this hand of cards I got dealt. I worried that it would scatter it to add this, and then I got better kind of ending. But in the end, like that is what happened. And so I felt like there were some ways to carry through what the way that I had been living for 18 years. So I just worked on pulling those threads all the way through to capture an ending that felt like a culmination of the story as opposed to just like a tacked on ending, like, oh, here's the update or whatever. So yeah, it took me a lot of time to figure out how to do that in a way that felt authentic to me and felt like the ending was earned by the book itself, not just thrown in there.
Yes. And how long did it take you to write the whole book?
I think about 5 years total, but I took a lot of breaks. I mean, I kept having to recover from writing it, especially in the beginning. It just was so raw and so hard to go back into those really hard early years. So I would write a bunch and then I just would put it away for months at a time and try to recover. And then I would go back and try to figure out like, is there something here? Can I use this to make it into something that is less about me and is more about the universal struggle of how you think life is going to be and how it ends up.
And if somebody's trying to write their own story now, how would you advise them to do it?
I would say just keep moving forward without worrying too much about the product. I think it's important to immerse yourself in the process of it and not think too much about the product until you get pretty close to having a product. I think that any books we write, but especially memoir, especially writing about your own journey, there's this process of you changing the book and the book changing you. And I think it's this sort of give and take for a number of years. If you rush that process, then the product you get to isn't quite as resonant as it might be if you allowed that full, back and forth that is necessary, I think, for you to see it clearly, for you to grow, and for you to sort of see everything in more of a three-dimensional way because those early drafts are very one-dimensional and that's fine. That's how they should be, but that's not really something that invites a reader in. I think you've got to keep working with it and keep revising and keep coming back to it to see it all more clearly.
For your first book, Point of Direction, that was more than 10 years ago, right? So this was a different path to publication. How did you find the new, I mean, you have a different agent, you have a different publisher. How did that all come about?
After I published Point of Direction, I sort of ran out of steam. I was working on this book, the one that's coming out in June. That was sort of the throes of the dizziness. I mean, I talk about,
Yes, you talk about the book, the fishing book in this book.
I think the boys were like 3 or 4 when Point of Direction came out. So I just sort of, kept writing, but really holed up to deal with life. And eventually, as they got older and I continued to work on it, then I just sort of started anew and was shopping around Dizzy for an agent several years ago, maybe 3 years ago now. But I was looking for agents that represented both because I knew that, well, I was hopeful that the fishing book would actually come together and be a thing. So my current agent, Andrea Somberg, who's amazing, was shopping around Dizzy and she was like, all right, it's time for me to look at the novel. And so then I went back into it. And then she was shopping around both and they both sold to two different publishers in within a couple of weeks of each other. So it was this long drought of me not really participating in the publishing world aside from publishing essays here and there and then finishing both books. But honestly, I think the biggest reason I was able to finish two books was because I started feeling better. And more than anything, just the brain fog was so hard to work through. And once that cleared up, it became very easy to do those final drafts of both books.
And your novel, your forthcoming novel, is based on your past life when you were working in Alaska, but it's novelized, right?
Yeah, so it's not really me. I was so impressed with the women in the fishing fleet in the small town that I worked in that fished with kids. And so I wrote a fictional story about a mom who fished with her kid. In the early drafts, I would have people read the early drafts to give me some feedback. And a woman that I knew in town, she read it and she had kids. And at the time, I did not have kids. And she was like, I mean, this is really great, but this baby never eats. I was like, oh. And then after I had kids, I was like, oh, right, of course, they
You
just eat.
get it.
So that one was a long time coming. It was much easier to write after I had actually become a mom.
Yeah. And your kids are still little or are they older
No,
now?
they just turned 15, twin boys. So we are,
I have a 17-year-old daughter, so we're Right. 15's a little, yeah, a little younger, but
Yeah, we are in the throes of learning how to drive right now.
oh boy, my daughter just got her license, so yeah, it's a whole new world. Did they read your book?
They have read Point of Direction. One of my boys actually, I didn't know he was doing this. They were taking their, well, it was in eighth grade. They were taking their CMAS, the ones where like they can't have their phones or whatever while everybody else finishes. So he was like, I think I'll read this, my book. I was like, okay. So he read it and it was really weird because I wrote the draft of that in my 20s. So it was like my 20 something self meeting his 13-year-old self, which was really, really strange, but it was great. But I think maybe Dizzy, I suggested to them they wait till they're about 30 to read that one. When they're like, try to figure out why, like try to make sense of their growing up, or, I think it'll be a good thing for them to read, maybe with their therapist or something.
How about Mike? Is he good with everything? I mean, he comes off great.
He does. I know. Yeah, Mike didn't read it actually till it came out because I kept asking him, like, do you want to read this? Because I'm writing about you. And he would just say all the time, like, he just couldn't go through it again. He didn't want to go back there, especially after I started feeling better. But then it came out, and then people were reading it and texting him or calling him or whatever. And he was like, I think I better read it.
I wondered if you could read a section from your book, starting on page 135.
Sure. The spine doctor had still not written back 2 weeks later when it was time to get the cortisone shot. I called the office and was told the only way to discuss matters with him was to make another appointment for 3 weeks out or to contact him through the patient portal. I paced just outside of sight of the big desk at the hospital where I was to check in for the cortisone shot and tried to ignore the way the horrible hope illuminated the possibility that I would walk over to the desk, check in, get the shot, and walk out of there not dizzy. Because I could not bear to think I might miss my opportunity to get out of jail due to fear, I took a deep breath and stepped into the airy, open waiting room with big, swoopy, decorative architecture above and below the front desk. Why couldn't architects just design things with straight lines? The seasickness increased, and I sailed out into the middle of the swoopy room. I checked in and sat down in a row of chairs. The way to survive a body is to disassociate the mind. But it wasn't working. I could not stop thinking about a needle entering my spine. Shouldn't I have gotten a handout outlining the potential risks? What if they paralyzed me? They'd shrug and tell me to get a wheelchair, that's what. Desperation was coming at me from all sides like a pit of snakes. Rachel Weaver, a woman in pale blue scrubs, called from a door that led into the depths. I stood. The snakes wreathed. I caught the eye of the woman in blue scrubs. She smiled. I turned away, found the exit of the hospital, and burst out into the parking lot, my chest heaving as if the charging bear had just veered off at the last minute. The GP who drove a Subaru went by her first name and brought her dog to work in the converted Victorian home, went through my spreadsheet line by line in the dim light of a lamp on her desk in what was once the back porch. I need help figuring out what type of doctor to see next. I studied her, studying the typed up version of my misery, wondering if all she saw was provider, diagnosis, result, or if she could sense the deer, sense the fact that I was wild with the knowledge that I would have to let Mike go, that I couldn't possibly subject him to a limited life, the clear, ringing desperation over the fact that I would never again carry a heavy pack in a dense wood. She took her readers off. This is an exhaustive list. The defeated cadence of the words crawled up my back like the soft legs of a spider. I get that doctors need to put up walls for sanity. You can't go through your day crying with every patient. It's the boundaries that keep them safe, keep things ordered, and the day moving along. Besides, what kind of idiot beaches their boat in the bay with the human swallowing mud and then expects someone to come out into it to save them? She took a deep breath. There's nothing else to do at this point. She dropped her readers on the desk, pinched at the top of her nose between her eyes. You're just going to have to learn to live with it. Later, at midnight, on my way home from work, the wooden arm at the train tracks stopped me on a two-lane road next to a farm. There was no way I could live with it. It was asking too much. As the train pounded past, its power rattling up through my feet, I thought here, late at night, like this, it would be over so fast.
That is such beautiful writing, Rachel, and it's just so powerful. And I asked you to read that one because it encapsulates so much of the story without giving an actual event happening. I mean, there is an event happening, but there's a lot of reflection and literary writing and the use of the metaphors, the ones that we've discussed throughout, the bears in there, the deers in there, all the emotions. It's just beautiful writing. It's just been a pleasure having you on Everybody Dizzy by Rachel Weaver. And thank you.
Thank you.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.